let's link up with Krista on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
First and foremost, Krista, thanks for having me on. As you mentioned, my name's Joe Rinaldi. I am a human being, and that's probably as vague of an answer as I could give, but you should care about what I have to say because I've been in your shoes. You'll understand that my struggle isn't your struggle, but at the same time it is. And I think that there's something to be taken for having gone through something challenging and being able to share that with the world. So I hope you'll have an open mind throughout this conversation, and I'd love to connect with anybody who wants.
I love that. There's so many different ways we can take it. But before we do, signature FYX question for all of my guests. What is your go-to coffee of choice in the morning? How do you like to prepare it?
All right. So if you're listening to this episode, don't tune out after this answer because I am the most boring person you'll ever meet when it comes to anything food related. I am like the biggest bottle, cup, like whatever container of black coffee. That's it. Like I can drink a whole pot every morning, just black.
All right. Keep it simple, right?
Keep it simple.
I have a lot of people on the show actually who are always like, I just go for black coffee. And it's usually a health and fitness related thing as well, because they'd rather spend their calories elsewhere than all the coffee creamers and all that stuff. So it's all good. We're not going to dock you any points for that. So let's get right into it. You told us you're a human being. And the biggest takeaway that I had from what you just said is that you're a very relatable person. And I think you, in following your social media content, knowing you since we were like in elementary, middle school, right? We go way back. You respect what other people have been through and don't necessarily try to say like, oh, like I can't relate or, you know, my struggle is harder than your struggle sort of thing. You are a listener. You're somebody who really just, I think, has a lot of empathy as a person. And you do such an awesome job in weaving your own story into that to explain why you can relate. You can have some sort of connection with just about anybody that you meet. So to unpack that for us a little bit, Joe, kind of give me your background on who you are professionally and personally. You're going through a professional transition right now. So if you want to talk about that, that would be great. And just kind of walk me to how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. So that was quite the introduction. I appreciate I don't take compliments well. So thank you for all
You're
of
welcome.
that. Professionally, I went to school undergrad for exercise science. So I got my degree from Rutgers University in 2016. I went to Drexel University in Philadelphia to get my doctorate of physical therapy, graduated 2019. For the past 2.5 years, I've been working a job in an outpatient clinic here in Philadelphia as a physical therapist. And as you mentioned, I recently made the transition as of this week, actually, to full-time performance coach, writer, and aspiring speaker. And so there's definitely a transition in where I want my life to go. And I could definitely dive more into that. But I think before we get there, the more important thing to know about me is that I have a genetic condition. It's called Best disease. And it's been causing me to lose my central sight since I was a child. And so essentially what happens is it's a rare condition that causes me to lose that sight very sporadically. And so I'm legally blind in my right eye. I can see fairly well in my left eye. Overall, I can function, but there's no telling what tomorrow brings. And so that's been the hardest part about this condition, is just that it's so uncertain. I can wake up tomorrow just how I am, or I can wake up tomorrow and not be able to read or drive or do normal things. And so that struggle has shaped my life in such a positive way. And I've gained so much from the fact that I'm losing my sight and going blind. And I'm so grateful for it. And that's like the craziest thing in the world to say, that you're grateful to be going blind. But I truly mean that. And I can take this conversation in whatever direction you think the listeners would appreciate. And so I'm an open book.
So tell us a little bit more for us to be able to really understand what that's like, right? I obviously consume a lot of your content. I subscribe to your newsletter and reading all of your Instagram posts pretty frequently. So I've read some of the information you've shared before about like different moments where all of a sudden you can't see things and like what that's kind of been like for you. So walk us through something like that, like maybe the most recent time that that's happened, and more specifically, how does it make you feel in the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first time it ever happened was when I was 10 years old, and I literally just woke up one morning and I couldn't see at all out of my right eye. And what happens is when I have an episode, I can go get a treatment. So the treatments used to be laser surgeries. Now the technology shifted and it's an injection of a
Oh,
drug
wow.
into the eye, which, like, I
It's
sound
kind of
like a tough
freaky.
guy. Yeah, it's not that bad though. It's really not. So I can get a treatment to stop it from getting worse, but it'll never get better than what it was before the episode. So the most recent episode was actually, I'd say, the most dramatic. And that was in the summer of 2016, about 2 weeks before I left Westfield to go to Philadelphia and start graduate school. I was on the beach with my family in Aruba. We were on vacation, kind of celebrating one big last hurrah before I left for school.
Yeah.
And I was sitting on the beach and I noticed that my sight was changing, and we had like 6 days of vacation left and there wasn't anything I can do about it. And I literally spent the vacation sitting in a dark hotel room by myself, just feeling sorry for myself, feeling hopeless, like crying. Like, I that those 2 weeks leading up to school were some of the hardest in my life, and I doubted whether or not I should pursue that path. And so there were a lot of moments during those 2 weeks where I told my parents, I don't want to go to school. What if I take out these loans and I can't finish? What if I go and I can't read? What if? And I was lucky enough to have my parents flip the script for me and tell me that I couldn't live my life based on what if. I had to live my life based on even if. And so even if I went blind, I would find a way to finish school. Or even if I couldn't see, everything would be okay because I would figure it out then. And so I put the worries to the side as best I could, and I went to school. And that first year of school in Philadelphia was by far the hardest, darkest year of my life. I mean, I'm so used to being able to put more effort into things and get better. So, like, better grades, get better at sports, whatever. But I couldn't. Like, I woke up and I just couldn't make myself feel better for a whole year. And I ended up spending more time with this girl at the end of my first year, and I started feeling better and better about myself. And lo and behold, that girl is now my wife. And the darkest season of my life led me to the best thing that's ever happened to me. And since that moment, when I realized that she was the one, I realized that everything in my life leading up to that point, including my eyesight, was happening on purpose for a reason. It was happening for me, not to me. And there's this great quote by Christine Kane where she says, sometimes when you're in a dark place, it feels like you've been buried, but you've actually been planted. And so to me, my eyes are just another example of how I've been planted in these different places. And it's felt dark at times, but every single time I've broken through the surface, sometimes not by my own will, but it just happens. And whether you want to believe in God or something else, something bigger, it's amazing, like how things just work for you if you choose to believe that. And so that's where I am right now. I truly view it as a blessing. And I would, like, anybody who came to me with a struggle, I would probably tell them that story and hope that it resonated.
I love it, and I love that quote. You've shared it with me before, so I'm pumped about the quotes because I know that's like your
Love quotes.
thing, and
Yeah.
you're a big reader. So I imagine that a lot of that has come from reading so many books, and we'll definitely get into that for sure because I want to know some of your top reads.
Gotcha.
But you said that you spent an entire year where you just couldn't feel better. Do you mean physically, emotionally slash mentally? Tell me a little bit more about that and talk about some of maybe the tools that you tried to use that just, let's put it in air quotes, weren't working, and what kind of finally like just changed everything for you. Because I think when people struggle with any sort of, in my own experience with my mental health challenges that I talk about often, it's like people always want to know, like, well, what was it that just changed? And when you're going through it in the moment, everyone around you tells you you're just going to wake up one morning, you're going to be sick and tired of feeling sick and tired. And that did finally happen in my experience, but I think it's hard to understand unless you go through that. It sounds kind of cliche.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And I think physically I felt fine. I mean, it was mentally and emotionally. I was, my whole life, I think I felt alone to some degree because I didn't think that people could understand what I was going through. The thing that I struggle with, my eyes, it's not something that you can see from the outside.
Sure.
Right, everybody else, I look normal. But on the inside, I feel different. And so that was always tough for me in that first year in school. I think it was a mix of that, a mix of being in a new place, being away from my family, and just worrying, to be honest, about what the future held. There was so much uncertainty with my eyesight, and I just let it overwhelm me. And so every morning I would wake up, and it was almost like I didn't want to get out of bed. And I think mental health is something that we need to talk more about, and the world's moving in that direction. And my story involves quite a bit of mental health, but I guess to make a long story short, I went home every weekend on a train, on an Amtrak train to see my family. Like I couldn't stay in Philadelphia if I didn't have to. So my family was definitely supportive for me. And it was a nice way to recharge every week to see them. I tried going to counseling. I remember sitting in the chair in the waiting room of the counseling office with my head down, feeling so ashamed and embarrassed. And like the only reason I felt that way was because of the stigma that just exists out there that
Mhm.
it's shameful or embarrassing to go get help, which couldn't be further from the truth. But I tried that and it didn't work for me at the time. And I think that was more because of the views I held about it, not because of what I was actually receiving.
Okay.
Um, and then eventually, yeah, I started spending more time with my wife and, not to get too much into the faith aspect of things, but it's a big part of my life. And I grew up in a Catholic church, believed in God, always knew he was real, but wanted to be closer to him. When I went through this dark season, I felt like he couldn't exist if he could let somebody feel like I felt. And so I started drifting further and further away from God. And turns out my wife was raised in a Christian household, and she invited me to church. And of course, I went to church with her because I wanted to stand next to like the girl I had a crush on, wherever it was. But standing in church, there was just this moment where I felt God put his hand on my shoulder, and it was as if he said, I know you stopped chasing me, but I never stopped chasing you. And to me, it was that moment where I realized I was in the right place at the right time. I was right where I needed to be. And it was that moment where I realized everything was, in fact, happening for a reason. And since that day, I've just felt nothing but amazing. And don't get me wrong, like there are hard days and there are seasons that people go through still, but that overarching theme of just trusting that things are happening for a reason and that things are happening on purpose, like it's changed my life entirely.
And in remembering that day so well, do you then remember the next kind of, let's say, the first action step that you took to maintain that belief, right? Because I think the part that a lot of people skip over, and something that I know you're big on, and knowing that you're big on habit, is the routine aspect. And this is something that has to be practiced. Like, newsflash that Joe didn't just wake up one day and has fast forward almost 5 years later, right? And doesn't, like you said, doesn't have struggles. You still have them. And so what do you kind of do, or what was that first, step or action, whatever you want to call it, that you took to be like, okay, I believe this. I'm going to practice this. I'm going to make this a part of who I am in terms of my identity, to make that perspective so strong.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's easy when somebody has a faith or somebody believes that things are happening on purpose to take a passive approach and just throw up your hands
Yeah.
and say, well, like what's going to happen is going to happen regardless of what I do. But that's kind of the opposite of what I did. I realized that while I believed that there was something happening, that there was this plan, I needed to play an active part. And so what I started doing, and I've always been an early riser, was I started getting up even earlier. So my 5 a.m. Wake ups turned into 4 a.m. wake ups. And some days were 3 a.m. wake ups. And my warm showers turned into cold showers. And my workouts that I used to skip every now and then when I didn't feel like it turned into consistent workouts 5, 6, 7 days a week, some weeks. And so what I did was I took all these habits and these things in my life that I already did, and I made them harder. And I made them harder on purpose. Because to me, how you do anything is really how you do everything. And the things that you do today, the habits that you build, are going to impact the person that you become tomorrow. And the person that you become tomorrow is going to impact other people. So I know that for me, waking up at 4 a.m., it's not always easy, but I do it because that was a promise I made to myself. And I'm building a habit of doing hard things. The cold showers, I don't always want to take them. Contrary to what people might believe about me, like I'm not that crazy. I don't enjoy them all the time, sometimes. But I do it because I'm seeking discomfort on purpose because I know discomfort is going to seek me later on in life. And I want to be prepared for that. And same things with the workouts or anything else that I do. There's a certain level of discipline, intentionality, and commitment because I'm doing those things to prepare myself for whatever comes tomorrow. And I know someday, potentially, right, I might not be able to be active on Instagram. I might not be able to read books like I read them now. I might wake up tomorrow and not be able to drive a car. And I don't know when that's going to happen. And that's going to be hard no matter how much I prepare. It's going to kick me in the face and knock me down. But I know that I can prepare today with the actions that I take to be the best version of myself, the most resilient version of myself for me, but also to inspire and encourage other people along the way. Because to me, there's almost nothing more inspiring than watching somebody walk well with grace through hardship. Because it's like a blueprint and a path forward. Like, yes, this can be done, no matter how bad you're feeling. It can be done.
Totally. And I think that's kind of tees us up perfectly for the big question that was on my mind and thinking about interviewing you and sitting down for this conversation and knowing some of the changes you've made with your career so recently is, do you feel this sense of pressure that you do have so many things that you want to accomplish, but knowing that there is this possibility that that could be essentially taken away from you or just a lot harder at any time? Does that put any sort of pressure on you in terms of like, wow, I feel like I really want to do this right now?
Yeah, it does. I try not to let pressure like that influence my decisions without other rational thinking that goes into it. But 100%. I mean, like I said, I know like I could wake up tomorrow and I might not be able to read the book that I'm currently reading. I might not be able to finish that book the way I'm used to finishing a
Sure.
book. I might not be able to drive a car to go to the gym tomorrow. And I don't know if that's going to happen. And so I think for me, what I've understood more and more as time has gone on is that like what I'm losing in sight, I'm gaining in something else. So I like to say what I've lost in sight, I've gained in vision. And to me, sight is what you see with your eyes open, and vision is what you see when you close your eyes. And I've gotten better at dreaming and imagining and that creative aspect of like, what can the future look like? And that's only because I've gone through this struggle. But to me, yes, I am creating the future I want now because I know that a year from now, 2 years from now, heck, tomorrow or next week, I might not be able to do it the way I want right now. So I'm going to take full advantage and live in the moment and be grateful for what I have. And really, I wake up every morning with this attitude of like, I get to do this. I don't have to do this. But there also is that pressure of like, yeah, I kind of have to do this because I want to do it.
And you don't want to go back to that what if, right? Like, and it's a different kind of take on the what if in the sense that like, it's more of like, what if I know when you were first describing it in terms of making the decision to pursue your graduate degree, it was like, well, what if I can't finish? This is more of like, well, what if I don't get to live out all of these dreams that I've essentially, what you're saying is that you're manifesting these things happening, right? Yeah. So that's, I asked the question from me thinking in my own head, like, wow, I would feel a lot of pressure. And as it is, I already feel like, oh my God, I need to do more all the time. So it's like doubling down on that given the circumstances of what's ahead of you and what you don't know is ahead of you. So I have a lot of respect for that. And I appreciate that you share, like, I have to also think about these things rationally too.
Yeah.
And, my big question given all of that is, how does this now tie into, first, let's start with your coaching, because you also mentioned writing and speaking, and I want to talk about that as well. But let's focus in on the coaching piece. Walk me through what it's like for somebody listening to work with you, like what type of person is seeking you out, because you have such an interesting background in terms of the physical therapy piece plus your exercise science degree. So you know a lot more than the average person, even with given the fact that like it's relatively easy to become a personal trainer. It's not a lot of barrier to entry. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of coaching, like I attract a wide range of clients. I think on the one end, you get like the 18 to 21-year-old college kid who just like wants to look better and like finds me on Instagram and sees a picture of me and like that instantly clicks with them. On the other end of the spectrum, you get people who maybe aren't as confident when it comes to exercise or their body image and struggle with something and come to me for that mindset aspect. And then we have everything in between. And I would say the thing that runs consistent through all of my coaching, no matter who the client is, or whether it's strength stuff, endurance stuff, mindset stuff, or business stuff, whatever it is, my goal is to meet people where they are. And so for me, that means understanding thoroughly where they've been on their journey, where they currently sit, talking to them and understanding the language that they speak and understand best. And I'm not talking about English or Spanish. I'm talking about, like, what is it that they care about and how can I relate to that? And then where do they want to go? And then the logical steps that I can help to get them there. And so for me, the coaching process is pretty hands-on. I definitely have a range of clients in terms of some people just get the programming and we update every week and email, communicate that way. And I have some clients who we do weekly coaching calls. And to be honest, like, I love interacting with all of my clients, but the ones who hop on the coaching calls are absolutely awesome because they're sharing a part of their life with me. And like, I'm so grateful for that. And I get to share a part of my life with them. And it's just really cool.
No, I'm with you there. I'm smiling so big as we're
Yeah.
recording this because I always say too, a lot of my clients who are taking the time to actually do their weekly check-in in the more formal setting with my coaching process, I make it like after the first month or so, when someone starts to get into the swing of things, I'll say it's like optionally mandatory. And I'm not going to ridicule you if you skip that part because they are still going through their written check-in.
Yeah.
But I find that the people I work with who really just make that, in addition to the written check-in, make that phone call or the Zoom or whatever non-negotiable, wind up having greater success in the long run. And half the time we don't even talk about food or we don't even talk about
100%.
nutrition, right?
Yep.
So how do you feel like your experiences have prepared you for those types of conversations?
So I think in terms of my eyesight, I think one thing I should say is, like, this is going to be a confusing sentence, but something I'm grappling with is like, sometimes like understanding someone else is understanding that you don't understand.
Yeah.
And
Like,
just,
I don't get what you're going through and
yeah,
acknowledging that you don't.
100%. I think too often people try to pretend that they understand somebody else, and that's the opposite of authentic. And so for me, I know that people haven't always understood me, and I know what that feels like not to be understood. When it comes to you're dealing with a problem that nobody else can see and nobody else has been through, I understand that. And so I feel like I can empathize and relate with people who are struggling with things that they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, they don't feel understood. And then on top of that, I've been through those hard times. I know what that feels like, but I've also come out the other side, at least for now. And I know what that transition is like. And so I feel like that experience of going from one extreme to the other has allowed me to take people and help guide them, really. I view my job as a guide. Like, I'm not fixing anybody. I'm not like telling people this. Like, I'm walking with them through an uncertain season of life in some cases to a goal. And we're, handling the ups and downs together because it's never a clean process. People make mistakes. I make mistakes. There are unforeseen circumstances. And like, really the best thing that I can do for someone is to just be there and be open and be willing to lend whatever knowledge or whatever energy I can to that person along the way. So I guess acknowledging that it's a messy process, but knowing that I'm there to walk with them because I've been in that darker place or that harder place where I've needed guidance myself.
And from more of the business standpoint, like say for somebody who's listening to this who is a fellow coach, or just in terms of you now going out on your own and what that looks like for you in terms of your goals with acquiring new clients, getting new opportunities, what do you think about that, what you just said, being a little bit more difficult to market, right? Because it's not necessarily as simple. And I'm asking you this question because it's something I struggle with regularly. And could I reword things and make them sound sexier? 100% could, but it's going up against like, well, am I doing this because I want to sell something in a simpler way? Or is it actually going to help me attract the right people who want to make some changes that are not going to be linear and are going to be up and then down, and we're going to have to make pivots and changes constantly?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And to answer that question, like, yes, it makes marketing so much harder. But at the same time, what I view myself doing is building a brand and an awareness that's going to one day pay dividends that maybe specific marketing wouldn't right now. So like, for example, if I niche down to like college kids between 18 and 21, I'd be missing a big, broad market of
For
people
sure.
that I want them to know my story. I want them to know my messaging. And I think for me, because you mentioned, right, the writing I do and hopefully some speaking, like to me, it's an ecosystem. Like I want to create a lot of free value for a lot of people so that there's that trust that builds up over time. And
Hmm.
then people know me. Like you think of, I'm trying to think of an example, like Oprah, right? Like she's on a TV show, she's in magazines, she's written books, like you,
Omni-channel.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
like you trust Oprah because, well, maybe some people trust Oprah because they've seen her in all these different places and they
sure.
know who she is. I want that before I want to sell things. Like I just want to spread a message, and then if sales come, sales come. And right now, like I'm not hurting for sales. Maybe that would be a different story. But I think being authentic and building a brand comes first for me, and the marketing will take care of itself down the road.
Absolutely. And I also think too, with somebody like yourself who is constantly trying to learn, I feel like that's probably a big reason why you're such a reader. But I'd love to know if that's not the case. You're always like getting ideas from different places, like especially with your quotes. Like I found between March and the middle of June, I did the 75 hard challenge, and a requirement of it is to read 10 pages in a book every single day. And that was one of the best takeaways from it for me, because I love to read. I just fell into this habit of I don't have enough time to do this because I wasn't creating the time. It wasn't that I actually didn't have enough. And I also realized that reading only 10 pages, I was able to crush books. And I didn't
Yeah.
expect that just those 10 pages would make that much of a dent in some sort of goal like that, right? So for you, I would love to know where you get your inspiration in terms of the different books that you like to read, because you're constantly like, I feel like you always have a book recommendation. You always have a new book in your hand.
Totally. Yeah. No, I probably read more books than I watch Netflix hour. Like, I mean, I watch like an hour of Netflix a week with my wife, and I probably read for like 10 hours. So, yeah, reading's a big part of who I am. And I think for me, I've always been drawn to self-development, self-improvement, any book where I'm going to learn or be able to have an actionable takeaway where I can be a better version of myself. And so the funny part is like, I actually never read a chapter book until I was done with college. So
Oh,
like,
really?
yeah, like all throughout high school, you read like Lord of the Flies and like Macbeth, and like I just used Spark Notes. Like I had no interest in reading those books. So it wasn't until actually the end of undergrad that I found that I enjoyed reading things that I enjoyed. So anything self-development, communication, human psychology, anything where I'm taking away things that could make me a better person. And you could get that from fiction, I'm sure, but it's just not my cup of tea.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that about you.
Yeah.
Like because you are such a voracious reader today, I would have just assumed that was always a part of your life. And also us having gone to high school together, like I also think there's a part of that too, that we had so much schoolwork, so many activities, so many different things that were probably pulling you in different directions. You played sports, whatever, had a social life. And I would imagine that having that type of environment definitely prepared you as well for a lot of the risks that you're willing to take today, a lot of the challenges that you faced. So I'd be curious if you've ever spent any time as, growing up in the same town, like asking this question to another person who can relate to that. This is more between me and you, I guess, and we're letting
Yeah.
someone listen in on that. But it's something I think about a lot. And I'd love to know what your perspective is on how that environment shaped you into the person you are now, in maybe both quote unquote negative and positive ways.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, like Westfield, so my parents still live in Westfield. Westfield is a town that I'll always love because it's made me the person who I am in a lot of ways today. But at the same time, there are some negatives that come along with growing up in like an upper middle class, predominantly white town where the culture in high school is to party on the weekends and do all that kind of stuff. So I think there are like three main takeaways for me from Westfield and how it shaped me. The one is that I had a great group of friends growing up, and I played sports with them. I did everything with them, and they continue to be great friends for me and a great support system. So I'm so grateful for the people that I know through Westfield, including you.
Thank you.
This, yeah, of course. The second part was like Westfield athletics. I played a lot of sports growing up. I played football all throughout high school. And that experience playing sports, especially at a higher level in high school, shaped who I am in such a positive way. I learned so many things: work ethic, self discipline, you name it, I learned it. The third thing, which was not such a positive thing at the time, but has turned into a positive thing, was the culture, the party culture on weekends in Westfield High School. So I've actually never had a legal drink. I drank all throughout high school, you know, like sophomore, junior, senior year, did all that to fit in. I think I felt a lot of subliminal peer pressure, if you want to call it that. Like nobody ever forced me to do anything, but I felt like I needed to fit in. And so on the weekends when I would, you know, go to parties and drink and do that stuff, I wasn't like who I wanted to be. I was doing stuff to fit in. And so that transitioned into college, where I went to college and carried on those same habits, like drinking a lot, just doing stuff to fit in with people. But it all culminated actually like end of first semester at college, when I woke up one night way too drunk, like, you know, choking. And that was a really bad experience for me, but it was a good one because it was the moment I decided that I wouldn't drink again. And I decided I was going to take ownership of who I was, and I wasn't going to do things just to fit in with other people. And I was going to live from the inside out. And so I think that experience of coming to terms with like who I was and taking control of my life happened only as a result of living the opposite throughout high school on the weekends.
Yeah, that's a very fair takeaway and a great way to look at it. And I'm impressed that your 18, maybe almost 19-year-old self, given that timeline, was able to have that realization. Do you think it's taken some time since, like in months and years of having made that decision, to realize that? Or after that happened, it was like, okay, this is consciously something that I'm kind of grappling with, and I need to make a change, and this is the exact reason why? Or do you feel like you've now been able to realize that and reflecting on it many months and years later?
I'd say a little bit of both. I think at the moment I knew why I did it 100%. It's been
Hmm.
easier to trust myself that that was the right decision as time has went on. And what I mean by that is when I made that decision to stop drinking in, you know, first year of college, I lost a lot of friends. I mean, people didn't necessarily want to always hang out with the sober kid who was no fun, and I didn't necessarily want to hang out with the kids who were just getting drunk every weekend.
Sure.
And so I felt very alone throughout the beginning of college because of that. And I doubted whether that decision was the right one or not because I felt so isolated. But as time went on, and as I poured and channeled that competitiveness and that energy into studying and athletics and writing and reading, I realized the further away from that decision I got, that the better off I was and the more like myself that I was becoming over time. And I've, you know, stayed in touch with people who haven't made the same decisions. And I mean, it's their life, but I don't want that for my life. And I'm happy that I made that choice now, even though it wasn't easy at the time.
And do you think that, you just mentioned this really briefly, but I think it's a great jumping off point to talk more about your writing.
Mm.
Do you feel like that decision was a big catalyst for you now carving out more time to do those sorts of activities? Like, when did you really, and knowing that you've now had your blog for several years, what was it that one day you were just kind of like, okay, I really want to start making this a thing, and more specifically making it a habit? Knowing that you're big on habits, I'm sure you've read Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he uses this as one of the first examples in the book, is like the idea of being a writer. It's not just saying I'm a writer, it's actually committing to writing every single day, even if it's just something super short. And then it becomes just a secondary thing for you. So what did that evolution look like for you in your life?
Yeah, I started writing my first year in grad school, in that
Okay.
dark, hard season of life where I felt like I didn't really have another outlet. You know, the gym could only relieve so much of
Totally.
my, feelings. And so I put them down on paper. But then after that first year, when I started spending time with, that girl who's now my wife, I realized as I came out of that dark season that if I was feeling like that, and on the outside, like I was the kid who got a scholarship to go to grad school, I was the kid who got straight A's, sat in the front of the class, like everybody thought I had it together. And on the inside, I
You
was
didn't feel
falling
like
apart.
that.
And I realized, like, if I felt that way, who else out there is feeling that way? So like, I need to share this experience. And so that's what was compelling for me to write that first blog, which was about the story I spoke with you about in the beginning of the
Mhm.
podcast when I had those doubts about school. And once I wrote that and put it out there for the world, I got so much positive feedback, like from people who I didn't even realize actually like ever saw any of my stuff, like friends I hadn't talked to since middle school, people I didn't know, friends of friends were reaching out to me. And I realized at that point, like I had to continue doing that. And the more
Yeah.
I've written, the more I've put myself out there, the more connections, the more compliments, the more impact that I've been able to make. And it's just been such this like a cool process where I didn't even know I was a writer until I started doing it, started enjoying it, did it more, enjoyed it more, did it more. It's just this like awesome feedback loop to the point now where I'm writing a chapter in a book. So by the end of the year, technically, I will hopefully be a published author. And by hopefully the end of next year, I will have the rough draft of my own book completed. And it's just been such a cool journey where I really learned more about myself than anything else. And it's been great.
Yeah, to further validate your point of like positive feedback and people reaching out to you, I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, my dad found your blog.
Did
And
he
he
really?
just, yeah, like at that point I was already living in Charlotte. And he just texted it to me or called me one day and he's like, hey, Joe Rinaldi put up this blog, because I went to school for journalism.
Mm.
So like that's something that I didn't know that we had in common, right? Because I was the person that pursued all that stuff where it was just kind of something that you had found as a way to, sounds like, be your therapy during
Yeah.
that time and just kind of use it for like a brain dump. And I was super impressed by it too. I feel like we probably had like an English class together too at some point, but
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I didn't know that Joe was into that sort of thing.
Isn't that funny that like I went to school for exercise science and now I'm writing more probably than I'm doing exercise stuff. And you went to school for journalism and you're doing the coaching nutrition stuff.
Yeah.
Like it just kind of flip flops. Like it
Uh-huh.
just goes to show you like what you go to school for is not what you have to do for the rest of your life. And
No, not
in
at
most
all.
cases, it's probably not what people do for the rest of their life.
Right. And I
Yeah.
honestly feel so much more prepared because of the communication skills that I learned. Like, yes, I have ways to go and it would take me forever to play catch up to you in terms of your science knowledge, right? Especially even from the physical therapy standpoint and the recovery standpoint. Like I could pick your brain on so many different questions about that. But at the same time, it's helped me in the sense of knowing how to communicate. It gave me a lot more confidence in wanting to launch my podcast. And I just kind of needed the push from someone else to go for it and do it, which I definitely look to you for that for sure. Because we kind of started like around the same time. And I'm super grateful because I even realize I've kind of taken for granted how much easier it's been for me in terms of like understanding like the tactics behind social media and what looks good, right? In terms of how those things kind of present. And it's just something that was always an interest of mine. And now how I see it is like, okay, that was the skill. It just so happens that the subject matter happens to be completely unrelated to what I went to school for.
Totally. It's all transferable. I mean, like that's the beautiful thing about life. Like you can be climbing one ladder and if you want to switch ladders and like climb a different building, there's usually like a horizontal, like you can switch ladders. You just have to figure out a
Mhm.
way to get over to the other one before you keep climbing. It's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, in terms of staying with the writing theme, and then I do want to jump to some of your speaking aspirations because I'd love to know more if you're willing to share.
Of course.
Do you have a particular author that really inspires you, or just is there somebody that you like to read really consistently? Like maybe it doesn't even have to be someone that's written a book, but like a blog that you regularly check out, or Audible that you listen to, any of that stuff, podcasts.
Yeah. Well, like James Clear, Atomic Habits is an excellent book. I know you referenced that.
Yeah.
And his newsletter is incredible. So
It's really good.
that was one of the reasons I started mine. So James Clear, and then Seth Godin is an author who writes quite a bit about marketing, human psychology, all that kind of stuff. And I just find him captivating. And when I've listened to him speak, he's had some really great insight. So he's someone that I read a lot of. And then the last one would be Malcolm Gladwell.
Nice.
And, he's just kind of like, it's kind of like different than the other ones because he's less teaching you applicable things, but more talking about really interesting human psychology and behavior stuff. So those are probably my three that I read the most frequently.
Awesome. All great ones. And definitely we can link those down in the show notes to some of their, any of their most popular books. All of them are people that I enjoy reading, listening to. I realized not too long ago that I had started a blog when I studied abroad, and I actually put a Seth Godin quote at the top of it. But at the time I had no clue who he was. I just like Googled it, and it was like quotes about trying new things or something like that. And that was what I picked. And now years later, his work is super applicable to the things I do on a daily basis. So it's kind of cool. It's like little like winks from the universe, I feel like were happening at the time that I didn't know it. But let's talk more about the speaking piece. So obviously you have your own podcast, which when we get to the end of the episode, we'll have you plug all of that so people can stay connected. But talk to me more about what you kind of envision for yourself in terms of speaking engagements and why you feel like that's kind of a next step in terms of the progression of a lot of the work that you're currently doing.
Yeah. So there's this guy named Inky Johnson. And I
love Inky Johnson.
Okay. Yeah. So
he's
Inky
awesome.
Johnson. And he's the one who initially inspired me to want to speak. He's so eloquent. He shares his story so well. And it's a story of hardship and struggle that he's turned into a positive and a strength. And so I realized that I have this story that I want to get out to the world because I know that it can help someone. It might not help everyone, but if I can just change one person's life through my writing, through my speaking, through my message, whatever it is, I want to do that. I enjoy speaking. I know most people don't enjoy public speaking, but there's something about being in front of an audience that's like exhilarating in the best way possible.
I credit that to our public speaking class that we had to take in middle school.
What was his name?
Mr. Altman. Yeah. Shout out to Mr. Altman. If for some reason you ever listen to this, thank you. Because seriously, that was one of the, like, I feel very fortunate that we had that type of schoolwork so early on. And he was so great. Like I feel like he could help even the person who felt the most uncomfortable, just get up there and go for it.
Agreed. Yeah. One of my best memories from that class was the game. I don't know if you remember this game, but you'd have to get up in front of the room and talk about any subject. Someone would throw out a subject and you had to just talk as long as you could without saying or whatever else. That was the best. But to get back on track here, yeah, I want to speak. And so my biggest and really only speaking engagement has been the graduation speech that I gave to my class at Drexel. It was in front of 350 people. And I talked a lot about the human side of healthcare, and it went over really well. And I practiced a lot, of course, but just when I was up there, there's this feeling that you almost can't describe when you are just in a flow state and your message is resonating with the people you're delivering it to. And it's real time and you can see expressions and feel and transfer energy. And I love that about speaking. And then the practical part of me, which we touched on earlier in the podcast, recognizes that writing will get progressively harder for me as my eyesight continues to change. Reading will get progressively harder for me. Speaking is something I can do anywhere, anytime, blind, fully sighted, or somewhere in the middle. And I realized that my eyes, I might not be able to use them always like everybody else uses their eyes, but I could always use my eyes and the story that comes along with them to impact people. And for me, I feel like speaking is one of the avenues to do that. And it's one of the most sustainable long-term avenues for me to do that. So hopefully pursuing that sometime soon. And it's funny, speaking of Westfield, to tie it back in, I posted in the Westfield Facebook group.
I saw this. I went back and read it. So
Did you see the one comment? So I posted like in Westfield Facebook group, I'm switching careers. If anybody like has any speaking engagements that I could potentially be a good fit for, I'd love to talk more about it. And like all the comments were super supportive and like encouraging. And then this guy was like, "What makes you think you could be a speaker? You should stick with your day job." And so I just responded to him. I was like, "Too late, I already quit." And funny enough, he messaged me back later that day after reading some of my blogs and actually learning about my eyes. And he works at the Optimist Club in Westfield. And he asked me to be a speaker for the Optimist Club after he told me I shouldn't be a speaker.
No way. I can't believe he reached back out to you. And I also think that's a testament to how you handled yourself. And I'd love to know in the moment, like, let's go knee-jerk reaction, because I'm sure at first that kind of stung a little bit, right? Like you're a human being. Tie it back to your introduction.
Yeah, you know what?
How did you feel? Like, and what made you kind of be like, okay, I can't change what I did, and I'm not going to let this random guy determine my fate here. But what was that? What were the emotions associated with that?
Oh man, I'm a kill him with kindness type of person. So that was my reaction. But my knee jerk reaction was, yeah, that stung a little bit. And like, yeah, who are you to say like I can't be a speaker? Like, what do you know? Like, but I'm like a nice guy, and I genuinely mean that. It's like I can't
You
be
are.
mean to
I'll
people.
vouch for you. You
I
literally can't.
I just like can't be mean to people to their face or ever. But yeah, so that was, but I just knew that like I just know I have to stay my course, right? Like outcomes, external validation or lack thereof, achievements or lack thereof, like the outcomes don't define me. And this is a process, and I need to be fully immersed in the process. And there's this great quote, I can't remember it word for word right now, but it's about critics. And or actually I'm going to switch it on you. The man
Okay.
in the arena. Do you know that quote?
Yes.
Right. I can't recite the whole thing. It's like a paragraph long, but if you're listening to this, look up Theodore Roosevelt, the man in the arena quote. And basically the gist is like, if you're in the arena, there are going to be critics, but it's not the critics who count. It's the person who's in the arena, whose face is marred with blood and dust, and who's doing the work. And at least if you fail, you at least failed trying. And, there are people who like to sit in the cheap seats and take cheap shots, and that's okay, but I can't let it phase me. So that was kind of my thought process there.
And I love that quote too, to even tie it back to coaching, be from the perspective of if you're a person out there listening to this and you want to go through a physical transformation, weight loss journey, fat loss journey, whatever you want to call it. Something that's been on my mind personally lately, and I'd love for you to weigh in on this, Joe, is how your client defines failure and really trying to pull them away from it, because usually the definition is coming from something external that has honestly prevented them from moving forward in the past, from, in my world of nutrition coaching specifically, just trying diet after diet after diet, and then telling yourself this story of like, well, nothing's going to work and I'm part of that problem. So how, if that shows up in conversations that you're having with people, especially around mindset, what is kind of your process of navigating somebody through that? And just to give a little bit more of an example, I had a client over the weekend who's new to working with me. She's currently tracking her food and sent me a text saying like, I didn't track my food yesterday. I hope that doesn't mean that I failed. I still tried to eat super mindfully. And as soon as she said, I hope that doesn't mean that I failed, I cut her off and I was like, wait a second, let's change this narrative here. So how would you handle that type of thing? How do you handle that sort of thing? Because I'm sure that it comes up.
Yeah, I have this great picture that I like to show people, but for the sake of the podcast, if you follow the stock market, right, that over time in general, most stocks, like they go up, but there's ups and downs, there's dips, there's crashes, but over time, a long period of time, the consistency of sticking with what you're doing is going to yield results. And so it's the same thing. Like you might have a bad day, you might have a bad week, you might have a terrible month, but that doesn't mean failure unless you stop trying. And you're right. It's all about the narrative. We are the stories we tell ourselves, and people have to frame things in a different way sometimes to understand that a setback isn't a failure and that failure is not fatal. And it's really important for someone to have a coach like you or me or somebody else out there to walk them through that process, because unfortunately, we create the stories based on the narratives that we hear about other people and from other people. And if you don't have someone in your corner who's there to encourage you or lift you up or change your narrative and help you do that, then unfortunately, it's going to be really hard to change that narrative. So that's why it's so important to surround yourself with people who are there to help you get through those rough spots and not to see failure as fatal, because it's not.
Totally. And you also touched on the consistency piece, which is just huge, and having those dips and peaks and whatever analogy you want to bring into them, right? And like the whole classic saying of like weight loss isn't linear. I think that there's such a pressure to want to get results as quickly as possible that people lose sight of that, because they're seeing what's on social media of like, this person did this thing and they lost 20 pounds in like less than 2 months. And what's excluded in the part of that is either one, how did they get there? And are you willing, if that took certain extremes, are you willing to live that way? There's a fellow fitness coach that I follow on social media, and he posted something not too long ago talking about people who have a six pack, right? And he was like, if you knew what their life actually looked like, you probably wouldn't want the six pack. And so it's like all relative, to go back to our whole point of this conversation, that perspective piece.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, could not agree with that more. And then the other part about it, just on consistency, is Simon Sinek. He's another author who I like to read, but he has this interview clip with Tom Bilyeu, and he talks about brushing your teeth. And he says, if you brush your teeth as hard as you can for 9 hours, one day out of the year, your teeth will fall out. You have to brush your teeth for 30 seconds in the morning and in the evening every day. And so I think people confuse intensity and short-term results with what they actually want, which is probably a more sustainable change that doesn't have to come with those extremes and the drawbacks that honestly come with those extremes and those quick changes. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
So to pull in a little bit of Dr. Joe for us with what you just said about intensity in terms of training, talk to me about, the physical therapy side of this in terms of recovery. I don't know the type of client that you were typically working with when you were working with your patients, and I'm not sure that it was necessarily like a sports rehabbing environment per se, but something that I work with a lot of people on is this idea of intensity in terms of their workouts shouldn't be 6 to 7 days a week of like 45-minute HIIT style cardio, just nonstop to the point where they're dead on the floor. And if they're so used to that, it's a really hard thing to get them to pull away from. And, because there is like a psychological association with that in terms of how your hormones fire and how you feel after that kind of workout. But, from your perspective on what you know about the body, tell us like, how we can kind of, if we are somebody who's listening to this and we're stuck in that mode of like, I have to work out at this super crazy intense level every single day, what is kind of going on there that might actually be doing us a little bit of a disservice?
Yeah. I mean, before I even get into the science of it, this was me from probably the age of 14 to 21.
Too. That's how I'm bringing it up.
I think most like teenagers, anybody who's working out to look good, like for the opposite sex, which to be honest is why like 99% of people work out anyway. I did that for 7 years and I saw progress, but not the progress that now I know I could have seen. And I think there is a huge psychological component. Like, it feels good to work hard. And especially if you're that kind of person that's competitive and you're that kind of person that loves that stuff, like, you'll do it. And I get that. But what I will say from a physical therapy standpoint and a physiological standpoint is that your body needs time to recover, and recovery is honestly just as important, if not more important sometimes, than the actual stress you're placing on your body. And so every time you're exercising, you are breaking down muscle tissue. You're putting stress on different body systems, and your body needs a chance to build back up. And if you're not giving a chance to build back up, it's not going to recover. And so there's something called, without going into too much detail, acute to chronic workload ratio. And so it basically looks at what's your chronic workload, like what is your body capable of handling over a long period of time, and then not making your acute workload, so like what 1 or 2 workouts would look like, too high compared to that chronic workload. So it's all about gradually increasing what your body can handle over time without doing too much at any one given time. And to put it in the most simple terms I possibly can, slow and steady wins the race. I mean, like, the tortoise and the hare is like, children's stories have so much value and you don't understand until you become an adult.
It's really true. No, it's really true. And I appreciate you sharing that, because it's something I feel so strongly about, because I've been the person to now be like, damn, I wish I did some of those things differently, specifically because it also develops a mindset that it's the all or nothing mindset. It's the perfectionism mindset. And honestly, I now tell people that those are forms of self-sabotage, like not wanting to track your food for fear of, oh, I'm eating out, so this can't be exactly precise, so I'm just not going to do it anyway. That's the worst answer I could have possibly heard. And I know I sound really harsh by saying that, but it's the reality, because even if you just gave me some information, if it was 50% right, isn't that going to make us 50% better in the long run? 100%. And the way that kind of showed up in my own life is when I was in a dark place, I kept telling myself, oh, well, like there's no point in me working out. And I've had conversations with you about this and us working together of like, well, if I can't get to the gym at all, like there's no point in going if I can only go for 30 minutes because like I really should be there for a full hour getting in some kind of workout. And it's taken a consistently, honestly, like battle with my mindset to really change that. It's not something that you can just wake up overnight and finally believe to be true until in my case, and I feel like you can relate to this for sure, is like going through that dark place to be like, all right, something's got to give here. And maybe what you were doing before, did it yield results at some point? Yes. But if all of your other circumstances are now different, should we be so sure to say that that's going to work for you again?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with that more. And like the other thing is I love analogies. And when you were talking there about, I only have 30 minutes to work out, but I really need to get in a whole hour. Like it's like if you were playing a game of football and you were down at halftime losing, it's not like you're just going to say, all right, guys, we're leaving. Like we're quitting, like there's
and when we say that, we're like laughing, like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense. And then yet we still get stuck on everything I just described.
Exactly. Like there's still a second half. Like nothing is absolute, and you can always do something, and something most times is better than nothing. And so, yeah, I think it's a really cool thing that you share that side of you and that part of your story with people, because it's so important, especially I'm sure your clients who are struggling with a lot of the same things.
100%. It's going back to what you mentioned earlier about us discussing the marketing piece and how to package yourself and everything, showing up in an authentic way. The thing that people remember about you the most is your story. And you could fabricate some story to try to thinking that that's what people want to hear. And that's not going to serve you in the long run. And I just find that it also, from the perspective of you managing your own business and creating the brand that you want to create, the people that you work with then ultimately become a part of that brand. I'm a firm believer in, yes, you can have a wide range of different types of clients, but you want to attract the type of person that you want to work with too. And those are the people who would actually relate like to your authentic story, not to this one that you crafted because you think it sounds good. Like you're not going to wind up enjoying those experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm getting to the point with the business stuff, at least, where I'm realizing I shouldn't keep taking people who aren't the best possible fit, because one, that's taking away from my openness and availability to work with the right fit. And also like I'm selling myself short, and I'm not giving somebody else the best version of me if it's not a good fit from the beginning and I'm doing it just for the money. So I've actually started turning away people, which is a weird feeling when someone knows you have availability because you're posting about it, and then they want to work with you and you say like, oh, it's probably not the best fit. Like maybe you should look for someone else. But
there's also a readiness factor too. I often have people that come to work with me and a couple months go by and all of a sudden they start to fall off, and you can't want it more than them. And you're doing that person a disservice if you don't say to them, hey, this isn't working, and maybe we just need to take a step back. Like to go back to a nutrition example, it's very easily described in the sense of people always think that they should be chasing fat loss like all the time. And there's certain seasons in your life where that's the absolute worst thing that you can be doing, because there's so many other things that you need to manage. Personally, professionally, if you have a really stressful job and maybe you're going through a season where your job is like enormously stressful for some period of time, in the long run, by putting yourself more stress on your body to go through a calorie deficit, it's going to become that much harder later. And it's kind of like knowing when that sacrifice should come in and out, but also working with somebody who can even walk you through like, what's the appropriate way to then maintain my calories, maintain my current physique, move just because it feels good for my mental sanity, whatever it is.
Yeah. No, there's an art to coaching. And I think that dialogue right there that you just had is a perfect example of there's no one size fits all approach,
Mhm.
and that sometimes what people think they need isn't actually what they
Yeah.
need. And sometimes that's a really hard conversation, but the best coaches are the ones who are willing to have it and be open and have it as a two-way conversation, but also be honest. Because I think honesty sometimes is scary, because honesty could drive people away potentially. And it's a lot easier just to tell people what they want to hear, but that's not also, giving them the best service that they could possibly have.
Right. I talk to this a lot with other coaches who I've done nutrition certifications with, and even my own business coach has said this before. Like, in talking somebody through a reverse diet and talking them through actually needing to increase their calories, that's a really hard conversation, because if that's where you want to start with someone, it's the exact opposite of what they expected to hear from you when hiring you. And to your point, a good coach is going to say, hey, this is probably not what you want to hear from me right now, but it's what you need to do if you are willing to be patient and help yourself in the long run. And I think we're in an environment today where that's just becoming increasingly harder, because we're comparing ourselves to other people. And, to tie it back to where you are right now professionally and you making this transition, how do you see that coming up for yourself in terms of like, you told me you were going from working like 90-hour weeks to try to make it all happen and feel comfortable to make this shift. Now having more time, do you feel like you're kind of trying to like play catch up in any way? What is that like for you? That's something that I've gone through and still struggle with regularly. So I love your perspective on it.
Yeah, of course. My personality is to run myself into the ground. Like I would rather work 100-hour weeks than like take 10 weeks of vacation, because 10 weeks of vacation would make me feel like I'm missing out on so much
Yeah.
opportunity. So that's my personality, to preface this. But yeah, when I was working 40 hours a week in the clinic and ramping up toward this transition point, I was working 80 or 90-hour weeks, and it was a lot. And now that I've made this transition, I'm too working with a business coach. And one of the things that we were really clear about from the beginning, and that he's helped me get clear about, is what do I want for my life? And what am I preparing for in the future? And for me, that's a family someday. And so for me, the challenge actually is not working like 60 or 70 hours a week.
Mhm.
It's keeping my schedule and like putting boundaries around it. So I have that time for my wife. I have that time to do other things. That's the hard part for me. So if anybody follows me on Instagram, like you'll see Mondays from now on are my busy day, like 14, 15-hour days, coaching calls all day. I get it all done on Monday. And then the rest of the week, for now at least, is a little bit more laid back. I have opportunities to do things like this and have cool conversations. But my struggle personally is not like playing catch up or filling it up. It's slowing down enough to keep the boundaries that I set in the first place. And that's like always been a struggle.
I'm with you there. I feel the same way. And that's something that I've had to actively work on with my own nutrition coach, because it's affected me wanting to go back to a certain way that I was before. And realizing that I need to carve out that time for myself and not feel guilty about it, because it's going to allow me to show up better in all of the professional pursuits that I have. And I sometimes have to wonder if that is a little bit of a product of our environment of growing up where we did in New Jersey, and just the competitive nature of things, because that's something that I think about all the time. And I appreciate it in a lot of ways, because I know it's helped me to get me to where I want to be and want to go and have the confidence to do it. But in full transparency, it's such a struggle, and was such a struggle for, what I went through in the past year in my personal and professional life, because I was like, oh my God, like I was on this trajectory to have all these things going for me. And I felt like I just completely blew it all up. And what are people going to think? And trying to get away from that is an effort that I don't take lightly, because it weighed on me more than I ever realized.
Yeah, no, I haven't thought about that recently, but yeah, 100% Westfield has influenced the way that I view the world. And yeah, it's super competitive. Everybody's parents are working in New York City, trying to make a lot of money to pay for expensive things that their kids could use to like have more status than someone else. Like it's crazy, crazy competitive. And give you kudos, because I think it takes a lot of awareness to, one, recognize that, and then two, move in the opposite direction and continue moving away from that, because it's so ingrained in us. It's at least you and I, and it's not an easy thing to change.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And I
Yeah.
want to be respectful of your time, because I know in the process you're going through right now, there's like an art to figuring out your schedule. And I will say it takes time. So that's my little piece of advice to you, being just a few months ahead. Like, really, I'm not that far ahead. But, you know, in terms of like thinking about your schedule the right way. And you highlighted such a great point of having a coach and making that a pillar of you growing as a person and as a professional and in all these different pursuits that you have, because I think that that's something people kind of lose sight of in terms of their nutrition and fitness goals, is like, what is the value of the coach? And having that outside perspective of, as you said before, to take the words right from your mouth, walking through it with them and not being like, hey, I'm telling you this and this is exactly what you should be doing. It's just kind of like, well, this worked for me. Why don't you go ahead and try it? Or have you thought about this from this perspective? I don't have any supposed skin in the game in your life to the extent that maybe your significant other or a friend or family member or whoever these other outside influences do. But Joe, it's been so great to have you on the show today. I'm super excited for all of your ventures and can't wait to see all of the awesome content that you continue to produce, because this isn't like something you weren't doing before. It's now just going to be at an accelerated level, and hopefully with more frequency too, which is awesome. I love your newsletter. I always love the quotes that you put on Instagram, and I want to make sure you plug all of that. So we'll do that at the very end, because people should definitely follow you, get connected with you. There's so much value in your content. But before we do that, we're going to do a quick little lightning round just for fun.
Let's do it.
Okay. What is, I want to keep it to the Westfield theme. I think it'll be fun. Okay. Sure. What is your, since you don't live in Westfield anymore, we'll do like things you miss.
Okay.
Favorite restaurant in Westfield and your go-to order there.
Oh, Hershey's. And it's just an Italian sub. I'm like a plain and simple guy. Yeah.
I haven't thought about Hershey's in a long time. Makes me think of high school, like going out to lunch. What was the best memory that you had from playing football in high school?
Ooh, that's a tough one. But I would say my first game I ever started, sophomore year, I played a little bit at the end of the season, and we lost, but I got to play. And that was probably like my best memory in football.
Toughest class from high school?
Oof.
Is there one that stands out? You don't have to like name the teacher or anything.
It was, calculus, BC calculus. Yeah.
That was a hard one.
That was tough.
Let's see what else. Being a sports guy, was there a certain field that you played on that was like a favorite?
I'll always miss practicing in Tamaulipas Park on like the grass football fields, because there was just this like gross smell that wafted over from like the river in the woods and stuff. So like I just remember that. But yeah, I probably spent like thousands of hours there.
Favorite, I know I feel like I haven't seen you post this as much because you've been biking a lot these days, but I know you like to run.
Yeah.
Do you have a certain path in Westfield that you like to take? Like neighborhoods or anything?
I like to run around the Jefferson neighborhood. That's where my parents live. So just all in those back streets, it's nice and quiet. I'm like not too picky when it comes to running, but it's pretty flat for the most part. So that's what I care about.
Let's move into some more of the book and podcast stuff. Outside of the 3 authors you mentioned, let's bring it to like currently today, because I saw this morning on your Instagram, you got a stack of books sitting on your desk. Tell me one book you're reading right now and what you're enjoying about it.
Oversubscribed by Daniel Priestley. And really what I'm enjoying about it right now is he's talking about building an ecosystem. So it's not like you have one service. There are multiple things that can feed off of each other. So for me, the newsletter, the blog, the book, the coaching, and he puts it in a really eloquent way that makes a lot of sense. So that's really resonating with me. And it's a good book overall.
Cool. That's definitely going on my list. I'm already intrigued just by the little synopsis. We didn't really talk too much about your YouTube channel. What has been the biggest challenge in getting that going, and maybe even in terms of just like filming yourself?
Oh man, I've been more comfortable in front of the camera than I thought I would be. The
Awesome.
biggest struggle is that I have to film the videos at legitimately like 3 o'clock in the morning because my neighbors work from home upstairs and like you can hear their footsteps all day. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, the garbage men come and I don't know what day they come on. It's like so random. So I literally need to film at 3 a.m. for the light and the sound. So that's been the biggest challenge.
How does your wife do with that? Is she okay with you
She's
filming that early?
she's a heavy sleeper. She's in
Okay.
the other room.
You got
Yeah,
lucky.
we're all good.
Well, thank you again for joining me today. I so appreciate it. And before we officially let you go, give us your shameless plug. So like one
Cool.
parting message, if somebody could take one thing away from this conversation, what would it be? And as a piggyback off to that, please tell us where we can connect with you, drop your podcast, your social media handles, YouTube channel, all that.
Sure. So, aside from the quote that I shared in the way beginning of the podcast, another quote comes to mind. I don't know who said it, but a river cuts through rock, not because of its power, but because of its persistence. And I'll leave it at that. And plugs, Instagram is the best place to find me, joerinaldi.dpt. You can find me on YouTube at just Joe Rinaldi. The podcast is called The Pursuit Podcast. Trying to think what else. The blog is joerinaldi.blog and the newsletter is the Cup of Joe newsletter. But if anybody out there wants to get in touch, please feel free to send me a message. I respond to everybody and I would love to get to know you. Instagram is definitely the best place for that.
And we'll be sure to link all of that down in the show notes so that everybody can get connected. To all of you guys who listened today, we appreciate you for both Joe's benefit and my benefit. If you liked something from this episode, not only leaving a review is helpful, but also sharing it. The more people that we can get this content out to, the better. And Joe obviously has had so many great and profound things to say. And we're looking forward to keeping tabs on him as he moves forward. This has been our latest episode of The Fix and hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day.